evening, everyone. Welcome to Tokyo International University's Global Dialogue. My name is Akitoshi Miyashita. I'm a dean of the School of International Relations. We have here Professor Misato Matsuo from Tokyo University. She will be speaking on Japan's foreign and security policy making in the changing geopolitical landscape of the Indo-Pacific region. Let me just briefly introduce Professor Matsuo. Professor Matsuo got her BA and MA degree from Sophia University in Tokyo. And then she moved on to a University of Warwick in UK, got her PhD. She has written many articles and a book. Her most recent book, which I have it here, is called Hegemony in the US-Japan Alliance. It was published in 2018 from Routledge. So without further ado, let's welcome Professor Matsuo.
So thank you so much, Professor Miyashita, for welcoming me to this TIU Global Dialogue. I'm very appreciated to be part of this event. So as the Professor Miyashita introduced, I'm Misato Matsuoka from Tokyo University, and my talk will be on the Japan foreign and security policy making into this kind of changing geopolitical landscape in the Indo-Pacific. So next page, please. So kindly, Professor Miyashita already introduced about my book, so I don't think I need to explain about this. Although today's talk won't be very much based upon this, but the talk will be stemming from what I have been working, because I've been looking into in the way in which how this security ideas has been kind of developed among this kind of so-called like epistemic communities. Even though this work is still a work in progress, so I will be introducing some of this kind of the work that I have been reached to, but I will be happy to share some of my kind of insights about this issue. And also in 2020, I published about this kind of the role of informal political actors, looking into the way in which how this kind of idea of Japan's pacifism may have changed. So some of the my talk will be based upon this. So next page, please. So this will be the outline of my talk. So before I will talk about the way in which how this knowledge production of Japan's security thinking has been formulated, I would like to kind of roughly introduce some of the features of the Japan's foreign and security policy making, although I think the audience is very familiar with but still, I think it'll be nice to kind of review some of them. And then I will mostly go to talk about this like pacifism and free and open in the Pacific and liberal international order. So you can go on to the next page, please. So like regarding the features of the Japan's foreign and security policy making, even though this might be some of the kind of ideas that you are already familiar, but I think it's still important to kind of consider it, because it still remains to be controversial. Like even when recently Japan released the 3 security documents, those like opposing forces still question about this kind of nature of pacifism and so forth. So I will briefly talk about this Japan's pacifism as well as anti-militarism. So, this is based upon the Yoshida Doctrine, which enables Japan not to like possess this kind of military forces, but rather let them focus on the economic like development. So regarding this doctrine, this Japan has this kind of exclusively defense-oriented policy, but nowadays Japan changed to its posture, which I will be explaining later on. So this was in line with its basic policy on national defense that was released in 1957. So as I mentioned now, so the economic development was the main focus during this time, while the security alliance with the US was regarded as a guarantor of the Japanese security. And can you move on to the next slide? But then this kind of like discussion, well, I'll be talking the major points of it. Certainly, before like 1990s, well, Japan did kind of develop its own like foreign policy making, such as like comprehensive security and so forth. But this question about Japan pacifism has posed, especially around like 1990s when the world, including the US, faced this issue of the Gulf War. And this kind of question about what Japan can do, but then at the same time, it also poses a challenge of what Japan can do due to its like the constitution, and as well as the so-called like anti-militaristic ideas that has been embedded in the Japanese society. And especially this Japan's pacifist identity has constrained its engagement, such as the UN activity or the peacekeeping operation, as well as a collective security. And so later on, well, this kind of become the trigger for Japan to like, well, some experts may say that, well, Japan may have retreated from this kind of pacifist form of pacifism that's kind of stemmed from its experience of the Gulf War, that not being able to contribute militarily. So can you move on to the next slide, please? Another feature that I would like to introduce regarding the Japan foreign and security policy making is so-called this values-oriented diplomacy, or this kind of arc of freedom and prosperity. So I would like to explain what this idea is. In fact, this idea has first emerged during the like Abe administration, and this was the idea that has been presented by this former foreign minister Aso Taro. So originally, well, this values-oriented diplomacy is understood that would be based upon this kind of common values or the universal values, including the liberalism, democracy, fundamental human rights, or rule of law, and so forth. So you can see that even today, when we see this kind of this issue about Russia's like invasion to Ukraine, you do see this kind of emphasis of this kind of importance of this liberal international order that's based upon like rule of law and so forth. But Japan has already been kind of emphasizing this kind of importance of the values, even though this values-oriented diplomacy has kind of stirred some of the controversy of so it become an unpopular idea, but still the elements still remain in the Japan's foreign policy making. And in fact, this values-oriented diplomacy do have this kind of the linkage with this idea of arc of freedom and prosperity. Well, and this was expand the ring of the freedom along the Eurasian continent to form a rich and stable region based on universal values. But at the same time, it is also rooted from the understanding about the US, like seeing the arc of instability. So this is kind of the idea that have been been influenced by the US thinking about the geographic idea. So this values-oriented diplomacy, the arc of freedom and prosperity, kind of still been the kind of the pillar for the Japan foreign and security policy making. So I'll move on to the next slide. So I kind of roughly explained about some of the features of Japan's foreign security policy making, but I will additionally want to talk about some of the key factors which might have influenced the Japan's kind of behaviors of the security kind of policy making. And one is certainly China. So I think I'm not sure how like how many audience will be very interested in the kind of the presence of China. But indeed, especially when we look into this recent Japan's like security policies or documents, this keywords of China has been very prevalent. And for example, for the 3 security documents that was released last December, they mentioned that, well, China has been the greatest strategic challenge ever. And even this kind of newest 2023 defense white paper, it hasn't, I haven't been able to check the content, but some of the Japanese news media did mention that in this defense white paper, Japan has expresses the grave concern. So we can see that, well, there have been this growing concerns regarding the China's growing military kind of power and so forth. Indeed, so this factor of China hasn't become very visible like these like 5 or 10 years. And another signs that have shown how China have influence on Japan's security policy making is, for example, the experts who have been involved in this policy making. So in fact, I have an opportunity to write a book review of this author's book, Sugio Takahashi. He has been, he worked for the think tank of the Ministry of Defense. And he has also been known as an expert on this kind of, well, he appeared in the Japanese TV program to talk about the Ukrainian invasion. So I have the opportunity to read this book, and from the title, I was thinking that, it will be, because it mentioned this kind of great powers competition. So, like great power may include not like only China, but like maybe Russia and so forth. But in the book, interestingly, it was almost only China. So I found it very interesting, but at the same time, this shows how China has been of serious grave concern from the Japanese perspective. So we do see that, I introduced in the way in which how Japan, they have this kind of pacifist identity and so forth, but we do see this kind of very changing attitude of Japan's foreign policy and security policy making. I'm not going to focus too much on this element, but the North Korea is also another key factor which may also affect Japan's kind of diplomatic attitude, because one sign is the kind of relationship, like Japan's relationship with South Korea, and we do see there have been this kind of closer or kind of the attempt to try to mend the relationship between the two countries, even from the recent G7 summit. You see it. Even though there are some of the critiques from some experts who have been really see comfort women issues as a problem, but still, I think because of this kind of growing North Korea's trying to kind of exert this missile threat to the US and South Korea and Japan. So we also see this kind of changing kind of attitude of Japanese government side. So I introduced some of the key factors which may have affected Japan's foreign and security policy making. But at the same time, my research has been focusing into the way in which how this kind of idea of free and open Indo-Pacific, as well as liberal international order, has seen as very kind of crucial ideas for the Japanese foreign policy making and so forth. So can you move on to the next slide? So now I would like to introduce the approach, the research approach that I analyzed. And well, from the international relations perspective, well, the book that which Miyashita Sensei introduced, I kind of mix this kind of other IR theories, but recently I use more constructivist approach to look into in what way these ideas may have been kind of shaping or changing. the security policy making. And so talking of this constructivist like framework, this kind of constructivists consider that ideas do kind of shape or kind of change the foreign policy making. So they look into the role of epistemic communities, for example. And I already kind of look into the way in which how the kind of experts may have involved in shaping it. And I would like to talk about, the case of like pacifism, for example, of how it changed to the passive form, to the proactive form. Well, talking of this epistemic community, well, there are like various kind of constructivist like analysis made, like looking into the role of the actors. So like they may be named such as like non-entrepreneurs or policy entrepreneurs. Well, in fact, the difference is quite difficult to tell. That maybe the non-entrepreneur is more like kind of, creating the ideas, but policy entrepreneur is those who is kind of shaping the policy. So that might be the kind of slight difference. But in my case, what I have been looking into is kind of the way in which how think tanks may have played its role in kind of, like creating the consensus about the security policy making, and as well as some of the policy advisor or like some other kind of involving actors who may have involved in it. So next slide, please. So as this is a work that I'm still working on it, so it's not the complete form, but in order for all of you to understand, I may want to kind of introduce some of the example to show the way in which how this Japan's foreign policy making may have shape or reshape this policy making. And as I mentioned earlier, well, pacifism has seen as one of the characteristics of the Japanese foreign policy making. So when people know about Japan, well, okay, Japan may be a pacifist and so forth. But having said that, because as I mentioned, this also challenged to the extent of how Japan can contribute. So the experts try to redefine this idea about the pacifism, and those who consider that, well, pacifism should not be the idea that will reframe or limit the activity to contribute to peace. They kind of reframe that, okay, the current like pacifism, which not be able Japan to kind of contribute like militarily, is passive form, but Japan should proactively contribute. The formal naming for is a proactive contribution to peace is needed. So this kind of idea has become been discussed among experts, so those who have been involved in the kind of defense planning or in the think tanks in Japan. It was like doing like 2000 and so forth that, well, before that, like around 1990s, well, there was this discussion about, okay, Japan should become a normal nation. But afterward, there have been this kind of growing voices to redefine the pacifism. So this is where the experts start to talk about, okay, the Japan should kind of make the pacifism to be more like proactive, and this become more institutionalized, especially like around the second Shinzo Abe administration. So talking about this, in what way did Japan proactively contribute to peace, is this kind of issue of this self-defense or this collective self-defense. As I mentioned earlier, well, Japan used to have this kind of the exclusively self-defense form, but that won't allow Japan to exercise collective self-defense according to those who claim for the proactive form of contribution to peace. So during the second Abe administration, or even the first Abe administration, there was this kind of meetings that tried to kind of reconsider about Japan's like usage of a collective self-defense in order for Japan to proactively engage in it. So there was this kind of advisory panel to kind of, consider about this legal basis of security and so forth. And then talking of this redefining the pacifism, well, for those who are specialized in this Japan's foreign policy making, you're very familiar with it, but for example, the Japan's national security strategy did clearly mention about this kind of proactive contribution to peace as a pillar of the Japanese foreign policy making. So you do see this kind of redefinition of pacifism has been adopted in the Japanese document. And in fact, those who were involved in this advisory panel is the Professor Kitaoka Shinichi, and that was like kind of part of my the journal article which I wrote and kind of look into in what way he's kind of engaged in this kind of redefining the Japan's pacifism. But he had been written in the English about what like the way which how Japan should kind of maybe change its posture. So if I quote from his work in 2014, he said that proactive pacifism constituted turning around from the former model of passive pacifism. So he's distinguished this kind of former Japan's kind of limitation to engage like the whole this kind of contribution. And can you move on to the next slide? And I will be talking about the free and open Indo-Pacific, or FOIP. In fact, I will apologize in advance that this slide might be difficult to understand because the issue that I'm now trying to solve is that as I mentioned, what the FOIP, or free and open Indo-Pacific, and the liberal international order is considered an important concept for the Japan foreign policy making and security policy making. But the issue is that it has been used like intermingly. Like it's really hard to separate it. So that's why I put it on this on the same slide. But talking of this idea about the free and open, the Pacific and liberal international orders, I will argue that this is pretty much in line with this on the values-oriented diplomacy, which I introduced previously. And even some experts even acknowledge that, for example, Japan's FOIP or Indo-Pacific policy has been kind of coming from this arc of freedom and prosperity. Like, as I mentioned earlier, like this arc of freedom and prosperity and the values-oriented diplomacy emphasizes this importance of rule of law and so forth. So my research has been looking into the way in which how this has been kind of tried to kind of defined by the actors informing the Japan's security documents or formulating the ideas. And if I take the example of FOIP, I will introduce some examples here. There are quite a few of them, but I haven't been able to finish sorting out. So I will just introduce some of them. But one of the kind of major one is JIIA. It is one of the major Japanese think tank, Japanese Institute of International Affairs. Indeed, this think tank can be considered not independent think tank, but rather kind of close to this kind of Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So it's starting from there. Although they do a lot of research on it, but still they have this kind of closer connection with Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So in the case of Indo-Pacific, when people discuss about which actors influence the most, and always talking of the think tanks, it has been questionable how further think tanks exerted the influence. Well, I'm still kind of trying to figure out what extent think tank may be able to shape. But talking of JIIA case, well, it can be said that it's still top-down thing because this is a kind of research project that the government kind of asked to do. So I'm trying to figure out to what extent the JIIA may have kind of, play its role in kind of formulating this kind of stronger ideas about the FOIP. But still, I will argue that it did contribute some of the ideas regarding the discussion that happens So this JIIA research has, has become like quite visible, like between like 2013 to 2019. But when I checked the report, quite interestingly, but it might be the ideas which is still like been kind of questioned by the expert, is that, well, in the first year, well, this might be like kind of remaining question about, okay, how the players of Indo-Pacific may involve. As like Indo-Pacific, like they are quite, it's not, so some expert may say that, okay, Indo-Pacific is the kind of ideas just try to encircle China. But then in the Pacific region, there are other states which not try to take a position. So like during like 2013 and 15, like they defined like those states as swing states, like ASEAN states or India. So there were this kind of few years that discussing about, okay, how to deal with these countries talking of the FOIP. But then afterward, like, in the 2016 to 2019, this the keyword of the rule of law have become prominent. But this rule of law is not the only concept for FOIP, but also the liberal international order. So you see the other overlapping. So this kind of concept is something that we may see it, like when we look into today's Japanese security documents. But you do see that this kind of formulation of ideas has been visible. And even like SPF, which is a Sasakawa Peace Foundation, like going back to this idea of proactive, like pacifism, it also mentioned about, okay, proactive pacifism and FOIP. So, I do argue that, there are this kind of role of think tank, which try to kind of formulate some of this consensus idea. And can you go to the next slide? And yeah, so I still kind of working on it. And even like, when we look into this kind of role of not only G7, but the participant of G7, okay, what is the role of the global South and so forth? But talking of the FOIP, even though this is not a visible kind of discussion that has happened, but a few years ago, there was this question about, okay, what is the Japan's policy for Indo-Pacific? Is it the vision or whether it's a strategy? Well, this kind of discussion emerged, especially during the U.S. having the Trump as a president, that the U.S. issued this kind of Indo-Pacific strategy. But Japan's side, for example, I introduced about Professor Kitaoka, like, in his book related to Indo-Pacific, he kind of argued that, okay, Indo-Pacific strategy or the policy for the Indo-Pacific should be seen like more as a vision, not like strategy. And this kind of wording may be stemming from the fact that, well, even though there are this kind of changing balance like between like Japan and China, but even during other period, like especially in like 2018 or 2019, there was this kind of careful balancing with China. So it might due to that this kind of wording of not like defining strongly as a strategy, but kind of vision was kind of safer way for like Japanese side to play. And I think because I need to kind of consider about the time, and I'm still kind of working on this, the liberal international order, like in what way this idea have kind of formed or has contributed to Japan's foreign policy making. But indeed, this importance of liberal international order has been kind of debated within the Japanese think tanks, like including Asia Pacific Initiative. Like this think tanks did a project on the LIO, like liberal international order. So clearly, it do see the importance of the liberal international orders. But again, well, like this importance of liberal international order has become visible, like again, Trump, like former President Trump, it's kind of, some people may have kind of a question about whether U.S. is, declining with this kind of not pertain, like kind of sustaining the liberal international orders. And it's a bit of a different matter, but again, NPO is another think tank that has been trying to kind of put an importance on the liberal international order, although slightly different manner, because while the API do look into the importance of, the liberal international order, as well as like US-Japan alliance, in the PO kind of look into this kind of other countries like China and South Korea, like it looks into this kind of like improving the relationship too. So, they may have a different kind of, focus on it, but still, both institutes do look into this importance of liberal international order. But we do see that this kind of, growing like kind of importance or this emphasis to kind of look into these concepts has become visible among the think tanks, and we still see this kind of, this kind of, ongoing like Japan side to kind of see these ideas are important for their security thinking. And maybe going to the next slide, or that would be the last slide. Okay. So because this, the work that I just presented is still a work in progress. So I will be very happy to kind of receive any kind of question that the audience may have. But like the reason why I haven't been able to kind of conclude or like present the concluding remarks is this kind of maybe like kind of, this kind of factors which might change. One of the, I raised like two factors which might be important for us, like especially for those who like related to the countries in Indo-Pacific. Is one factor is Taiwan, and of course, like people may say it's a China factor, but I will say Taiwan factor in the sense that, and like next year, Taiwan would have presidential election, but there is this kind of, like, I don't know, this kind of maybe this kind of mood that there might be the change of the president or this kind of changing of the kind of major political party. That the current major political party is DPP, and that is a political party that see US and important actor. And I'm not going to talk too much regarding this one, but again, on this relate to my research that okay, the role of think tanks do matter. But Taiwan has been like especially under DPP, DPP, like there have been this kind of active kind of like informal relationship been formed like with US politicians as well as Japan's side. So now we do see that, well, there are this closer time with like Taiwan, US, and Japan. But then when we think about, what's going to happen in 2024, and, because, well, maybe it is common that the presidential system, there is this change of the government. But yeah, there have been this kind of, like visible voices saying that maybe the next major political party might be Kuomintang, and that is a political party that see like China as an important actor. So, currently we do see this movement that okay, like US and Taiwan is having closer tie, that might be kind of like balancing with this growing presence of China. But if if we, look into the role of this Kuomintang politician, for example, so the former president of like Mao Zedong, he visited China, and he's kind of show it's kind of this continuing like kind of relationship with this communist political party of China. So this Taiwan factor, is an important thing for us to keep an eye on it to see whether this may affect or change the influence. And another factor which quite a few experts do look into is now people are quite a few people may say global south. Although I found this concept again quite interesting because global south as a concept before is seen as kind of like global north and global south, and global south is including those countries which is developing. But now certainly yes, the former BRICS, it is a developing country, but it wasn't same as global south. But now especially in Japan, we include I would say BRICS members and those like developing country and global south. So I found that quite interesting. But now, like even for the Japan side, they see that, well, this global south countries is also important actors to kind of, have this kind of stable like relationship or the stability in the Indo-Pacific region. So like, for example, experts may say, okay, like what, we may need to kind of look into how maybe India may try to balance with like its neighboring countries, including like China and so forth. So and so like during the G7, it was also quite interesting to see that, well, every year G7 do have like different members, like, but now we do see this kind of growing like non-G7 members to join. And this time was quite interesting to see that those like important key players, like not only like US or Japan or other like European countries that see Indo-Pacific important, but like South Korea or like Australia or, Brazil, and India was at G7. So, that was quite interesting, like kind of, move to look into. So I would like to finish my talk, but as I earlier introduced about these features of Japan's foreign policy making, well, still Japan it may be said that, well, it has its pacifism, but in the proactive form, and Japan do see like this kind of values-oriented diplomacy as a pillar of its strategy. So I may finish there. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Misato, for your very instructive presentation. I would like to make 3 questions because I'm a discussant and I'm privileged of asking first questions. I can't agree with you more about what you have described and talked about. But I have 3 specific questions that you may want to consider. First, you introduced the concept of constructivism, and I like people who try to explain phenomena with theoretical concepts like constructivism, realism, or whatever, because that would promote our knowledge and theoretical debate. Now, because you focus on individual think tank members, professors, people like Hitaoka, Shinichi, yes, certainly they have some influence. But if you want to explain major changes in Japanese security foreign policy, like from pacifism from proactive pacifism, would you really have to go and explain those think tankers and their ideas to explain change? Or can you simply point to the rise of China, the North Korea threat? So what I'm trying to say is, can realism fully explain what you're trying to explain? And so I think really, if I am a realist, then I would say what you're trying to explain, even this concept of a free and open Indo-Pacific is a concept to counter the Chinese concept of one belt, one road, and trying to exclude China from this community of Asia-Pacific region with the like-minded countries who have values in like democracy, human rights. So, China, you're not us. So I think this is more like a narrative war. And I think realism or realist can explain these without resorting to this constructivist concept. So my question first is, what kind of evidence would you need to prove that constructivist explanations fares much better than the realist explanation? I think you may want to find a case where the two theories have contradictory predictions, and then you try to find which theory is doing better. But otherwise, I think both can say, we can explain the phenomenon. So that's number one. The second question is about the causal arrow. You seem to imply that the think tank, knowledge, those things would influence policymakers, and then they will produce new policy. There will be a change in policy, like proactive pacifism. I have a feeling that maybe the arrow would be the other side, the other way around. That is to say, policymakers have their own agenda ideas, and they want to strengthen their ideas or rationalize their ideas by using think tanks or college professors to come up with some kind of a theories framework. I'll give you one example. When the Ministry of Foreign Affairs under Aso came up with the Arc of Freedom and Prosperity, they formed a group of university professors to think about what exactly this concept should mean. And I was invited to those group, and I asked why we have to do this. Well, the foreign ministry official told me that because Aso came up with this idea, but he doesn't really know what to include inside. So we want you, scholars, to think about what this arc of prosperity, freedom of prosperity should include in actual policy. So maybe policymakers have some kind of clear idea, and because they want to rationalize their policies, they want to use scholars to come up with some theoretical framework to justify their policy. My final question has something to do with the second one. What role should we as a scholar play in this kind of a policy debate? You talk about the Kitaoka sensei, and he's very famous, and I have read his books, and I have a high respect of him. I have a friend who used to be a president of Doshisha University. He came and made a speech in defense of Abe's security policy. And I have a lot of agreement with him. But when he came back to his own college, his college was a very liberal leftist, and he was forced to step down. He was not reelected. So, and I admire him because he knew he would be criticized at his own home university, but he nonetheless, expressed his own view, supporting Abe's policy. Should we? Are you willing to go that far and try to express yourself, even if that could cost you a lot, cost us a lot? I think this is a very, very important question for us. We have own views, but sometimes if we express ourselves, there will be a strong opposition, and we may lose, job. My friend didn't lose a job. He lost the presidency in the university. But so I have some question about your opinion. So that's my questions.
Yes, so I would like to answer the 3 questions that Professor Miyashita gave. Thank you so much. And, because, when I was preparing and when I think about this issue, the question that you raised is something that I have in mind. So, I really appreciate to kind of, make it more like kind of visible about these issues. So the first one, yeah, I think it's always this kind of question of whether the realist may have a stronger claim to look into this current situation, or whether the constructivist will be able to provide it. So what I would like to look into is there is another kind of research I've been looking into, which is the way in which how this realist ideas have developed from the constructivist viewpoint. So I will be arguing that, well, certainly realist explanation would be helpful to look into this kind of maybe the competition of the great powers and so forth. But sometimes, maybe not always, this kind of realist explanation will be helpful. For example, I explain about in the end about Japan's hesitation to describe its policy to Indo-Pacific as a strategy. So even though Japan may if it is a realist explanation, okay, Japan will easily kind of ally with US, but there was this moment that Japan has been careful of kind of seeing it. So well, this is still work in progress things, but so I really appreciate your point about how constructivists can explain better than realists. So this is really one of those kind of important homework for me to consider. But I will argue that not always the realist kind of viewpoint will be able to explain some of the issues. And talking of Japan's foreign and security policy making and Indo-Pacific is really I wasn't able to present what kind of activities or this government action has been made within this forward policy making. But talking of this more fast documents about the FOIP, well, around 2017 and so forth. So it focused more infrastructure project, not really on this kind of maritime and so forth, but more on the infrastructure. Well, of course, this is I on this China's Belt and Road Initiative. So in some way it can be explained for realists, but again, this Japan's way of crafting its foreign policy making, I believe, can be explained from constructivist, but I'm not sure whether that is a strong argument to to say that constructivists may provide a better explanation than realists. But I do believe that there are this kind of the role that it can looking into the ideas. And then thank you for also posing the second question about which hour goes first. This is always a difficult question, but I will argue that not always these hours come from the top. But this might be another debate to say, okay, the case study might be selective. But when I look into the pacifism ideas, I will argue that it's not really the top. It's more kind of academic or those who are thinking about the defense or have been specializing about Japan foreign policy making. So our is not always kind of top down, but it can be kind of bottom up. And I think one of the factor sometimes it can be bottom up is, although this is another kind of topic to think about, but this relates to my published article, the Kitaoka sensei, but it's also due to this kind of context way of doing the diplomacy. So because of this, it kind of enables the this kind of experts to kind of maybe kind of influence or maybe able to involve and shaping it. But certainly there are no consensus of which has kind of influence. So thank you so much for the second question. And the third question, yeah, another good question to think about the scholars. I think in the broader international relation, well, there are this kind of research to look into or using this kind of so-called reflexivity, how the scholars can play its role, and it's kind of being as a foreign policy expert and so forth. So I'm not sure whether I got your question precisely, but okay. when I think about myself, how I should play, how should I, like play as a role of scholars? Yeah, I also understand that. Oh, I could become like kind of, like white or black. Like okay, I'll just go for it to like express what I think. Yeah, I think I'm more like kind of careful to like choosing okay, which venue to release the ideas. So it may depend on the personality of the scholars, of like what is the purpose of the scholars, like what they want to do, like whether it's more like educating the people or whether they're more interested in influencing and involving the policy making. So depending on that, that may define what kind of role that scholars can make. Or in my case, I've not been very that kind of clear type of scholars, but I hope that answers your questions.
All right, thank you very much. And now I think I would like to open the floor for Q&A. I would like to remind you that we are all recorded, so we are on record. And so please know that you may be quoted whatever you said in this session. All right, so anybody would like to, yes, Michal.
To me, like Japan's recent activities to changing more like a proactive form of pacifism really makes me think about balance of power theory. And I'm wondering whether you have any, so that is like a more realist viewpoint. I'm wondering if you have like a critique to like balance of power theory and Japan's current activities, like increasing the defense budget with I think like 60% by 2027, which to me seems like a very like a balancing way of doing things.
So yeah, can I answer that one? Yeah, thank you so much. And I think your viewpoint on this recent like Japan's like kind of defense like kind of not like well, it can be a part of this attempt for the defense buildup. Like you use this like realist idea of balance of power. Although I'm now trying to figure out like what is the object of the balance of power? Like, like you may be thinking about maybe China's raising power. So like Japan is also trying to balance its power. But in what way? Is it like kind of ally with US, or is it more like kind of Japan's trying to kind of increase its own defense? Like
for me, I see both. They are agreeing with the US position, and they're like also been vocal about defending Taiwan, and then also increasing the budgets. I see it like as a package thing, and especially with like their alignment with the US is like the major idea here.
I see. So like, yeah, certainly like when we look into this kind of, like after this Ukraine invasion happened, well, there was a lot of like, like kind of concern that next will be Taiwan. I think I will argue that also have a factor of this SNS, that Twitter, it has been very useful that, okay, next is Ukraine, next is Taiwan. Although later on the experts say that, oh, it's not exactly the same situation, but still, I think, that kind of also, well, that is not the only cause, but, like we do see this kind of growing, like kind of concern of this possibility of Taiwan contingency may happen, like, and this is also, again, the think tanks like, CSIS release a report and so forth. But sometimes, yeah, like, I don't know whether I will be able to answer your question about balance of power. But what I do see about this situation, certainly visibly, okay, we do see that Japan is trying to have this defense buildup that has been been announced through this security documents. But then when this countries, like, if we see the balance of power, but when we look into the domestic side, it's not really this kind of easy way to kind of do this balance of power with China, that there are this kind of concerned voice of the possibility of Taiwan contingency and so forth. So I will argue that, not only the balance of power that we do see this kind of ongoing situation, although like in the security documents, it say, okay, it will aim for 2027, and then or later on the US experts say, okay, it will be like 2026. But having said that, there have been this kind of careful kind of, discussion. So, well, I'm not sure whether that answer or, I don't think that, there was a question that, I think that is your idea. So I do see that that is really relevant, like viewpoint to consider. But I will also say that, well, maybe not only balance of power, but, there are the other like elements to look into. So.
Okay, thank you so much. Next question. Yes, Steve.
So thank you again for coming in today. So my policy paper proposes strengthening U.S.-Japanese relations through enhancing economic policies. And so from your research, would you believe that Japan is considering a strategy on technological or industrial decoupling with China?
Good question. Unfortunately, like today's talk, I was planning to include this aspect of economic security. I failed to do it, so I'm sorry that I wasn't able to include that. That is another like kind of maybe challenge for Japan to really like completely decouple. That because even for US, I think, although I think that might be a different like issue from my talk, but. Yeah, currently, I think U.S. has this kind of bipartisan, like kind of, like agreement to, maybe kind of be cautious of this China rise. So there are like kind of legislation has been passed and so forth. I might be wrong, but I will argue that, well, I'm not sure whether Japan would be really want to decouple completely from China. But I think, we do see, this might be similar with this kind of, align U.S. militarily, but economically, speaking, there are this kind of really, maybe like, like checking like how China may act, but, and that is also another like kind of challenging move made by maybe South Korea. I'm not sure about Taiwan, but Taiwan, is a really important spot of semiconductors. So it's they have this kind of really various factors to look into. So my like current answer would be that no, like not completely decoupling. I will ask you.
Because I also noted too that you raised an interesting issue with referencing India, and obviously I know that India has been a challenge for China recently, and so. I have this notion that a lot of states are going to begin to invest in India and moving, especially since it's right next to each other. It's not that big of a move to move industries over to India. Would you see that in the decoupling concept that industries are moving from China to nearby India?
I see.
Logistically speaking, it's not impossible. But
it's not impossible. It's not impossible. Double negative. I'm not the expert on India's like policy making, so I cannot. My comment won't be useful, I think. But I have this. I have a good friend of mine, like Japanese friend, who work in India, and I think in the news or like on the surface, we do see that India has been pretty much like kind of quite neutral. But I also heard the story that indeed in the kind of companies like sphere, they have been very like kind of cautious of this. So we might going to see some change that might happen like with this kind of, the India's like playing its role regarding this kind of economic sphere, but I'm not sure about, that might be interesting area to look into. But thank you for your question.
Okay, anybody else? Yes.
Hi. I just building more on the argument against constructive I just wanted to know is considering Japan's language regarding this policy is very passive, but passivism, vision, etc. strategy. I just wanted to know, is there any real way to understand the intentions behind this modality in this did? Is it are they trying to be decisive? Are they trying to be, move forward? Is there like a core strategy behind their passive?
Thank you so much for your comment. Yeah, I wasn't been able to talk more about that aspect, but I think that is quite important to think about, what is the purpose of Japan of using this? Maybe I might be wrong, but I will say like maybe broad concept. Indo-Pacific was also seen as the geographical region that will broaden Asia. So kind of maybe conveniently inclusive. So I think some of the experts might criticize me, but I will argue that that is a strategy for Japan to make it like flexible and kind of, deciding what action to take. And although like pacifism, it become like clear that, it won't, it became like more proactive. But I think I didn't mention this. Yeah, I might mention this concept like comprehensive security was another concept that was introduced. And today's like comprehensive security, yeah, it might be more like kind of have this realist element, but I think I will argue that it's quite intentional way of kind of framing it, so that Japan can kind of flexibly I will argue, although those these key actors might say that they will disagree, but I will say that is a way to. I will yes.
All right, Barry, you have a question.
Thank you so much for I'm sorry, I was on the train for half of the talk, so I might have missed a few points. And my question is regarding this. My first question is similar to the answer that passed. So in your talk, you mentioned how the FOIP has become less of a strategy and more of a vision. So it's a kind of a wording problem. So I want to go a little bit into detail. How does that differ? How does the wording of vision and strategy differ? And does it entail the wording of vision? Does it entail a less active approach towards FOIP? And if so, what are some of the signs for us to understand why we're using vision instead of strategy? That's my first question. My second question is related to words. I know that very recent, so I just wanted to ask, how would Japan's role and its certain recent actions signify or play a role in shaping the security perception in the region? So as we've seen, one is the defense paper of Japan, not necessarily pulling out, but stating China is somewhat of a concern. Second is joining IPEF, Indo-Pacific led, what is US led. The third one is then talks about the new office in Japan. So how do these actions and will shape the security perception?
Okay, I will first answer the first question on the strategy and the vision. So like this might be the kind of Japanese language and so forth, but it's not like my argument, but it's an expert argument why they kind of differentiate. But the strategy sounds like kind of really quite this kind of has this kind of competing like elements, whereas a vision is more like kind of the vision for the country's like national interest. So it's kind of the strategy to entail some of this kind of more like this kind of rivalries and so forth. So there was this moment of kind of avoiding this wording, but then it depends on the kind of which top political leaders is kind of in charge of it. So the vision, like as a word, it's like kind of the goal of it. So do you have this kind of goal? And I think when those experts who face for using vision, I think they also, like I mentioned about the infrastructure projects, so they think about this kind of Japanese like kind of national power, like like not really like focusing on military, but you also like economic or so forth. So it's kind of mapping its kind of Japan presence in the Pacific, whereas the strategy is more like kind of how to kind of kind of balance or so forth. Well, that is my the question for the first one. I'm not sure whether I got your second question about the role of, so your question was? Oh, yeah.
So recently there was some English Japan was paper about China.
Okay.
He talks about and the last one is it's involved in foreign he was like framework, economic framework. So there's the Indo-Pacific framework, and the recent one is the platform against for economic coercion. It was recently announced in G7. So
I see.
Somewhat either isolate to push China away from like.
I'm not, I'm not in the position of clearly like kind of like defining like what is the actual action. But when I see this G7 movement, I did see this kind of close, like kind of more like kind of strengthening ties of this kind of so-called like Indo-Pacific region, like also thinking about this non-G7 participants, so we do see this kind of more like kind of informal like way of, kind of strengthening this kind of so-called this Indo-Pacific membership. So yes, I don't know whether, that's answering your question, but I do see, there's kind of more like kind of closer, like kind of, consensus of this kind of cooperation. And so I think the G7 case is quite very interesting to look into the way in which how this Ukraine like President Zelensky was invited, and that was like kind of the suggestion by the British like Prime Minister. So we do see like a lot of things happen, like with a lot of intention. And but I think the common like goal for this G7 member states was like kind of forming this kind of maybe consensus like in the Pacific. And maybe as you say, like kind of, well, not only like to like Russia, maybe like China, like otherwise, because G7 should be the platform of this kind of developed countries, right? And then, of course, we know that, G20 emerged, like kind of responding against like G7 of kind of lacking the elements. But then now we saw this time that G7 invited those like kind of, other like non-G7 member states, and now including China. So maybe, it might be this kind of, trend. Sorry, I say yes, but.
Back in when I was in that grant was how to change the demographic of Japan with policy as well. And my question is kind of a little bit, but like how much does public opinion matter in the decision made by Japan? Because when you talk about security thinking in Japan, we've seen things and possible to do with parliament. How much public I also talked to one of my Japanese classmates, and this is person here, but she didn't care about.
So I think that's not wrong. I respond that of course that public opinion is important, but it doesn't, well, although I think thinking about this kind of case of anti-militarism, maybe public perception matters, like when because it's kind of related to like constitutional like revision and so forth. But other than that, public perception may, well, I might be wrong, but I think not necessary it will be the defining factor of shaping the Japanese security policy making and so forth. But talking about demographic change, I think it was quite interesting this time in this recent 3 security documents that like the previous one didn't, I remember that it didn't include, but this time they include this kind of how the demographic change in Japan do affect this planning. So we need to think carefully or kind of rethink about, okay, like there's maybe females like kind of self-defense forces or and so forth. So it might be some of this interesting factor to look into. Thank you.
Any other questions from the floor? Okay, Jeff.
can I repeat the question?
Okay, so now we invite the questions from the webinar audience. Please read some of the questions.
Yeah, actually, we only have one question. So one question from Professor Hakim Lee, and then I'm going to ask my own.
Okay.
First, from Professor Hakim Lee. So he has two questions. First, how the Japanese government understand Taiwan in the context of its own security? For example, if China unifies Taiwan by force, are the Japanese people thinking that Okinawa could be targeted? That's just one example.
Okay.
Second question is, how effective is the value-oriented foreign policy of Japan and the wider Indo-Pacific order? Is normative or Japanese rhetoric constrain Chinese behavior? That's Captain Lee's question. My question is about sort of related to the China factor. President Turkish last week sort of tried to advance the goal of a world free of nuclear weapons.
Okay.
So my question is related to China's nuclear buildup and its potential impact on Japanese foreign policy. Some studies, including one by the Department of Defense of the United States, said that by 2035, that's less than 15 years from now, China will reach nuclear parity with the United States. And so I wonder if you have any thoughts on that, because I don't know if Japanese experts are necessarily talking about this now, but I assume China becoming a nuclear peer of the United States can dramatically alter Japanese experts' thinking, broadly Japanese science.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Hakim. And it was a question, very good points. The first question is very interesting about, if for example, that if there's a scenario that China and Taiwan cannot unify, then what is the role of Okinawa? I'm not very sure about, currently Okinawa is part of Japan. So I don't, it sounds quite unrealistic that, Okinawa also be like kind of part of that group. Although I know that in the past, Ryukyu Kingdom did have a close relationship with China, but, I don't think, that leads to the fact that it will unify. So that is my quick answer for the first one. And the second one, this is a good point to think about, okay, like values-oriented, like diplomacy or this Indo-Pacific, whether it's like, I don't know, normative or rhetoric. Yes, good point. I think that some of the critique would say that, well, Japan is a quite like kind of rhetoric thing. Like when we look, like Japan is not really liberal in the sense of human rights and so forth. But still, sorry, maybe I won't be able to answer this one. It is something that I would like to keep on thinking whether it's really like truly like normative or rhetoric. I will want to keep on thinking about it. And I think the third one, I hope I got it, about the China's possibility or this becoming like a nuclear power in 2035. To what extent Japan has been been aware of that. Good point. I might be wrong again. I think it depends on the kind of, if it is a defense like planners, they might have a different idea that they may already know that, okay, we need China. But I think that quite a majority of them, they're not really looking into it. They rather look into more like kind of maritime, like kind of, expansion of China rather, but not about like nuclear itself. So, but I think this also relates to the extent of how like China may become like powerful, like AIs, it is something that is quite difficult to see its actual like kind of influence. So, but that might be like the issue which maybe the defense planner of Japan should care about this kind of China's like kind of potential of becoming like kind of nuclear power into one, maybe by 2035.
Okay. Yes.
If I may ask a question, thank you very much for the presentation. It was really interesting seeing this like genealogy of this concept over very many years. And I think as it travels through the years, there kind of certain elements of change that led me to kind of this question. It's good the map I found that was really the Arc of Freedom and Prosperity map. It was quite interesting because the Arc of Freedom kind of came from Japan and down across India, but then back up through the kind of the Persian Gulf. And all the way up into Europe, like Eastern Europe, like Ukraine and Balkans. And of course, Japan was involved in kind of supporting kind of UN peacekeeping missions in the Balkans, supporting the dispatch troops to Iraq and dispatch troops to Afghanistan. And so kind of in that context of 2006, 2007, one can understand the kind of the background context of the values element. But more recently, as we shift to the kind of free and open Indo-Pacific and the countries that the shrinking geographic space, I guess I'm assuming, right? Because we didn't have a map for the free and open Indo-Pacific, but there was like a geographic space for the Arc of Freedom that, I don't know, the values don't seem as, like, what are the contents of those values? It's the contents of the values when defining the Arc of Freedom were values that were associated with like democratic nation building, right? Whereas if you're like Japan-Myanmar relations, Taiwan relations, like these things, so how are values defined now, or is it kept intentionally very vague?
Yeah, so yeah, as you know, you precisely pointed out this kind of framing or this kind of geographical like kind of arc of like freedom and prosperity, and VoIP is quite different. So like where's the values added to it? So like currently I think when it can be said that Japan's kind of still have this values oriented diplomacy. It's more like kind of well, some people may say it might be rhetoric, but this kind of democracy, like values like kind of this like-minded countries like kind of having this kind of closer like kind of cooperation on this. So but then having you might be like right in the sense that what is the element of the values in it. So yeah, I found your comments quite interesting that this kind of mapping, yeah, certainly it do reflect of when this idea emerged. And so certainly this kind of Balkans case was something that has been like kind of considered like in the 2007 or 8. But then now it's more like if we even look into Japan's MOFA, it's more like kind of looking into Southeast Asia, like like kind of for the infrastructure. So the value itself is more like kind of represent more like kind of kind of this, whether it's norm or rhetoric of this democracy or liberals and so forth. So thank you for your comment. I would like to keep on thinking about it.
Just to follow up, I think both values and rhetoric. Values in the sense that Japan wants to distinguish itself and its allies like US, Australia, India from China. So there's a clear political motivation behind this. But I think it's also a rhetoric in the sense that the Indo-Pacific is a term that has been gradually used by countries like, it maybe started in US, Japan, but now in Australia. If this term has become more used in countries like Southeast Asia, ASEAN, or India, I think in terms of this narrative competition, this group has a great advantage over countries like China, North Korea. So once again, it's a war of words. And I think it's important narrative, how you describe your policy. The narrative competition is pretty common in this particular war in the Ukraine. The Russian narrative, the Ukrainian narrative, and which narrative we should believe or use, I think has a great effect. So, all right, any other question from the floor or from the webinar listeners? All right, if not, I think we should close the session today. Thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you.
And thank you for the audience. I really appreciate it.
Okay.